Ready to go when you are, Madam Chair.
All right. All right, well, there's no time like the present, so I think we're going to get going. Calling this hearing to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councillor and the Chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Boston's COVID-19 Recovery. I'm joined here today by my colleagues, Council President Ed Flynn of District 2, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, also the Vice Chair of this committee, Councillor Julia Mejia at large, and Councillor Ruthie Lujen at large. Very pleased to be holding this hearing today. It's being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. Today's hearing, I'll just read out the full docket. It's on docket 0160, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to accept and expend the amount of $5 million in the form of a grant awarded by the United States Department of the Treasury to be administered by the city's Chief Financial Officer, Collector Treasurer, from the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund in the Treasury of the United States, established by Section 9901 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And we're very pleased to be joined today from the administration by our Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, Segun Idowu, who is not a stranger to this chamber, but this is his first time appearing before us as a chief, because it is also our first hearing of the new session. So we're very excited about that. And joining him as well is Deputy Chief Midori Morikawa and our Director of Small Business in the Mayor's Office, Natalia Urtube. So I'll go to them all in a moment. I just want to acknowledge that we've also been joined by Councillor Kendra Lara from District 6. And I'll just note for councillors, and Councillor Frank Baker from District 3. I'll just note for councillors that because it's an appropriation, we're going to go straight to the administration for information on it, and then we'll go to councillors for questions in order of arrival. I just want to stress for our new colleagues that this hearing chamber is not the same as the council floor for meetings. So any speaking you do in this hearing, any asking of questions, does not constitute your maiden speech on the council. It's a different metaphysical virtual space. And so people are welcome to weigh in with their questions and comments without worrying about breaking that ritual. So now I think I don't see any further colleagues who've joined us. So I will just remind councillors that the deck for the presentation from the administration is in your inboxes. And I'll pass it over to Chief Idowu.
Well, thank you, Chair Bach. Happy Black History Month to everybody. I want to thank you, Chair Bach and Vice Chair Flaherty, President Flynn, members of the council, my colleagues who've joined me, and members of the public for joining this conversation virtually. And I want to express my gratitude to all of you for the opportunity to come before you today, especially on this topic of getting relief to our small businesses, which is important to all of us. As you mentioned, Chair, I am not a stranger to these hearings at the council. It's a little weird, but exciting at the same time to be on the other side of it, representing the administration. And I have to say that I am humbled by the opportunity to move from being an advocate for change to an applicator of it, and working in partnership with all of you for that. As well as appreciate the opportunity to, as you mentioned, this is the inaugural hearing of the City Council, and it happens to also be my inaugural hearing. So thank you for allowing me to share in that with you. After just completing my first month in this role, I have a very deep appreciation for the work you all are doing to serve our community. As the chief proponents of your respective districts, you know full well the challenges faced by the small business community. Now in its third year, the COVID-19 pandemic, for which this committee was established to help shepherd us out of in an equitable and sustainable manner, continues its relentless assault on our micro and small businesses. From supply chain disruptions to ever-rising costs to decreased foot traffic, and to what brings us here today, depleted capital, our efforts must be several-fold to not only save our businesses, not only help them recover, but also support their growth and opportunity to thrive for years to come. And we're here to begin a piece of that effort and humbly request that this committee and the council approve our request to replenish the Small Business Relief Fund with $5 million from our ARPA funds to aid our efforts to get needed capital to businesses in desperate need of financial support. As mentioned earlier, I'm joined today by Natalia Urtubey, the director of our small business unit, who along with her team of champions like Vanessa Marte, Aaron Schleifer, Emily Patrick, Abby Fury, Ron Ely, Dico Jabril, Tom McDonough, Louis Ottonelli, Demaria Stukes, Kim Garofalo, Lisa Slavin, Ivy Dan Tosh, Akima Dockery, Bia D'Amberville, Isabel Garcia, and Yara De Jesus, as well as the members of our entire cabinet under the leadership of Midori Morikawa, our deputy chief. They've accomplished the Herculean task of pushing out as much money as possible to small businesses across our city. In my former role at the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, we actually lauded the city for the shape of its grant program, which we're discussing today. Not only was the application simple, but the award amount and the process was straightforward. The team members I named earlier worked with members of BECMA and other partners to help small business owners get through the application process. And the new system, which Natalia will give an overview of, allows owners and entrepreneurs to track the status of their applications. Many diverse businesses have received the financial resources they needed at the time to stave off closure, but we know it was not enough. And so we're here today with the request to provide more resources and deeper assistance to those in need until the pandemic has subsided. We acknowledge that we've learned from these processes that more needs to be done to get access to information about the grants and assistance in applying for them. Following Director Urtubey's update on the program to date, we'll share details on what the new iteration of the Small Business Relief Fund will look like with the committee and the council's support, as well as steps that we're taking to directly help businesses get access to these funds and information about the grant program. Again, I thank you for this opportunity, and I will turn the floor over to our Director of Small Business.
Natalia, I at least can't hear you, although I don't see a mute button.
How about now?
Yes.
Keep trying to use these headphones and they are failing me. So my apologies, everyone. Thank you so much, Chief. Thank you, Councillor Bach, for inviting us. Thank you, councillors, for being here today. I'm super excited to share with you our plans for these $5 million to continue to support small businesses throughout the city of Boston. Councillor, is it helpful if I just share my screen, the presentation? Okay.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Got it. Everybody see my screen okay? All right, and I will go through these slides quickly. You have the content in front of you, and I know we shared some spreadsheets as well. So if there are any questions, please feel free to let me know, but I don't want to spend a ton of time on the presentation as this information is in your inboxes. So I'm just going to give a quick overview. To date, we've issued $29.7 million to 5,600 businesses. As you can see in the graph to the right, we started our relief efforts in early April of 2020. So our first fund actually went out on April 6, 2020, and that date will forever be ingrained in my brain. And over the course of the last 20 months, we have been able to support many small businesses across the city with relief efforts. One thing that's really interesting for me is that this particular grant, the Small Business Relief Fund 2.0, is our effort to also help businesses grow beyond the pandemic. So there's a relief component, but also that growth piece. So we, with this grant, launched a new portal, which actually would allow business owners to see their grant, move across the process of review to try to showcase more transparency about the actual application process. And so the Small Business Relief Fund 2.0 can be accessed on two different pages. The boston.gov/business-relief is a landing page where we actually host 11 different we host the application in 11 different languages. And there are one-pagers that describe all of the elements of the grant in those same 11 languages. The Boston Knack Portal is the application process for the English application, and that is part of the Boston Open Data Portal. The Small Business Relief Fund is designed to help cover expenses that can help businesses in their recovery and growth beyond the pandemic. So businesses can apply for two different types of grants in the same application. The first being the relief grant, which can help businesses support any outstanding debts that they might have due to the pandemic. The second element of the grant is up to $10,000 to support business growth through tools, technology, materials, personnel, and others costs associated with investing in their business. We, in this effort of replenishing the fund, will not be accepting duplicate applications. So if folks have already applied, we will be revisiting all of those applicants. Due to the immense nature of this of the request we've received, it's very unlikely that we'll be able to do additional funds to folks who have already received grants, but we will be looking to consider that as an option. This particular additional $5 million will work to serve the priority businesses that we've already identified as a part of our BPDA research, but will specifically prioritize even further the businesses that have been hit most by the vaccine mandate. So we know food service and production and restaurants, arts and entertainment, and fitness, wellness, and recreation businesses. However, that doesn't mean that if somebody has received funding and they are in one of these other categories that they won't receive funding. We just want to make sure that these top industries get funding sooner and more rapidly than the others. The other piece, which I already mentioned, is that businesses don't need to reapply. We want to continue to review applicants, and the reason we're asking folks not to reapply is because it does create more work for my team to review every single application. And if folks are already in there, we don't want to risk duplication of efforts because all of those applicants have already been reviewed. As I mentioned on the website, there are PDFs available in 11 languages that have the information that is necessary for all businesses to apply. It talks about the priority industries, it talks about the limits of the grant and kind of what folks need to do in order to be able to apply. So this is what the Knack Portal looks like. Businesses are required to first create an account, and this is through our business registry. They will add themselves as a business. Each business can create, so if a business owner has 2 locations, they would create 2 businesses in the portal that are assigned to each of their business. This is a really simple process so that all of the really heavy information, vendor ID information, addresses, demographics about the business owner, they only have to do that once. The cool thing about this Knack is the Knack Portal is that once a business is registered on that, they can then apply for additional grants and provide the necessary documents that pertain to that grant, but not necessarily, they don't have to go back and re-add information about their business, which is really great for us. Once that's done, they can look under the grant applications and we'll find any grants moving forward. Right now, it is just the Small Business Relief Fund 2.0, but in the future and in the past, there have been additional grant applications in this portal. So once the business is already established in the registry, the grant applications are very easy to submit to. And every single applicant for every single application, we'll be able to review their status. So they'll know exactly where they are in the process. And, they can ask questions about that, but we will revert people back to the portal. It's a way to help our team be able to be more efficient in the review process. This portal will also help us collect the compliance requirements of this grant. So for any approved application, there will be a receipt upload section where they can tell us exactly how they're spending these funds, give us that proof, that snapshot of that expense, and it allows them to be compliant. This is just a very simple kind of overview of what the grant, what the portal looks like, where they can add receipts and how they can actually add those receipts. So I want to talk a little bit about the relief fund to date. So this is the start of a dashboard that we're working on that will be available to the public, which will showcase all of the different demographics of the recipients of this grant. Just at a very high level, we've had over 2,400 applicants. And those 24 applicants have requested over $40 million. So there's a very clear need in the business community for these funds. To date, we've issued $8 million in grants to 628 businesses, with an average grant being of $12,700 out of that maximum $20,000. Councillor Bach had requested some information on the total applications and then the total applications approved across the city by neighborhoods. As you can see, they're pretty reflective of kind of the size of the commercial districts that we've seen, that we have in Boston, as well as the applications we've received. And in addition, the race, the self-selected race of the applicants and how those applications versus the approved. One caveat I will mention is that we have seen a lot of duplicate applications in certain communities, particularly our communities of color. And I think that that's just kind of that reinforcement that they need the funding and support. And so we will this is why you might see some of these skewed numbers in certain applicants versus approved. We've also seen a lot of need in the completion of these applications. So a lot of folks will submit incomplete applications or will have questions about their applications. So we're doing a lot of outreach and one-on-one support on these businesses. So this is why you may see slightly different percentages of applicants versus approved applications. And now I have the pleasure of turning it back over to Tito to talk a little bit about our next steps in our partnership work to ensure that these small business relief fund dollars get out to our hardest hit communities, and that we can actually leverage lots of this collaborative effort to further impact businesses and support them in other ways. So, Chief.
Thank you very much. So just quickly walking through what the next iteration of what we would like this next iteration to look like. You know, as Natalia raised at the beginning with the numbers, you know, 2,400 applicants, only 600 approved, expressing a need for $40 million. So we know that the $5 million that we're requesting will not be enough to cover the huge need out there that businesses are looking for and need at the moment. But we know that also this time provides a unique opportunity to partner with the state, which similarly approved ARPA funds for small businesses across the state. In fact, the governor signed legislation setting aside $75 million for small businesses, with $50 million of that geared toward women and minority businesses. And we know that it's our communities of color and women-owned businesses that have suffered the brunt of COVID-19. And so see this as an opportunity to partner with the state to make sure that Boston businesses that are not only eligible for our grants are similarly eligible and aware of the grants at the state level, so that beyond the up to $20,000 they may get from Boston, they have an opportunity to get up to $75,000 from the state and their pool of money. So in our conversations with the state where we are now, folks that are applying to Boston and being awarded also have, you know, it shows that they're eligible, have the information, et cetera. will have the opportunity to be shepherded through the system on the state level. At the same time, the technical assistance providers that are supporting those who are applying to the state level will also be providing that same assistance to Boston applicants to help walk them through the Boston process so that they're not left out of getting that support. But we also know, because all of this has been about the grant money, and coming from my previous role, what we know is that grant dollars are not the only thing that help a business survive. In fact, whether you get $20,000, $75,000, you could get $100,000, it does not guarantee that your business is going to survive. That $100,000 could be gone in 2 or 3 weeks with all the back rent and other expenses that a business has to cover. What we know works at the same time in partnership with that funding is wraparound deep technical assistance, folks who are helping you determine how best to invest this money and providing months and months of support beyond that to either give you mentorship, advice, et cetera, to help you grow your business based on that investment. And so we are going to be partnering with Small Business Strong, one of our local TA providers here in the city, who will be operating as a clearinghouse, ensuring that those who are applying for Boston grants are, on the application, they'll check off, we're okay with you sharing our information with a third party. We're interested in technical assistance. And so Small Business Strong will help funnel these businesses, whether they're approved for an award or not, to the appropriate provider of technical assistance to help that business grow. So as an example, if you're a food business, we all know and love Commonwealth Kitchen, and so Small Business Strong would direct that business to Commonwealth Kitchen for additional technical assistance support to address any other issues in the business and et cetera for all other businesses. Important to note too that Small Business Strong is part of a larger collective called the Coalition for an Equitable Economy, which is about almost 100 different TA providers from across the state. The languages they cover are comparable with the languages that our application is provided in. And so end of the day, we wanted to use this as an opportunity to expand beyond just the grants in Boston, but to connect folks to other opportunities beyond our city limits, as well as long-term technical assistance. So that's the exciting piece that we're looking forward to with this new iteration.
Thank you, Chief. And lastly, I just wanted to communicate with folks the ways in which we're doing outreach. So we host a weekly small business conference call where we offer interpretation services in Spanish, Vietnamese, and Chinese. We also offer additional languages upon request. We also send out weekly newsletter. We will be starting and have already gotten the chance to do business walks with Mayor Wu, but we will be starting more consistent walks with the chief, and we invite all of you to participate in those walks as well. And then obviously you all have incredible constituent services and access. So we urge you, councilors, to please help us spread the word about these grants and make sure that your constituencies are engaged in this process as well. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to you, Councilor Bach. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Before I go to questions, I just want to acknowledge that right after I did recognitions, we were joined by Councillor Brian Morrell of District 4 and Councillor Tanya Fernandez Anderson of District 7. And since they're both new councillors, I will repeat what I said at the start, which is that this committee room, metaphysical virtual committee room, is a different virtual space than the council floor in the meeting. And so you can feel free to ask your questions, make your comments. It does not count as your council maiden speech. So just want to make that clear for everybody. And then I also, before I go to questions, just want to read quickly an absence letter into the record. So this is from Councillor Liz Braden of District 9, who wrote to say, "Dear Chair Bach, I am regretfully unable to attend this afternoon's committee on Boston's COVID-19 recovery hearing on docket 0160 regarding a grant from the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund established by the American Rescue Plan Act. I kindly ask that you submit this letter into the record. As the district city councilor for Allston Brighton, my office has encouraged neighborhood businesses to apply for the Small Business Relief Fund. While Allston Brighton businesses submitted 110 total applications, 38 grants were distributed to our district. Further, our neighborhoods are home to a diminishing number of commercial properties designated for light industrial use, and I hope to see more relief being directed to these businesses. I look forward to ongoing conversations to increase the geographic distribution for the next round of funding, providing assistance to an estimated 300 additional small businesses in the city. My staff will attend the hearing to take notes, and I look forward to reviewing the committee report. Thank you. Again, that's from Councillor Liz Braden, Boston City Councillor for District 9, Halston Brighton. So having read that into the record, we will now go to questions for the administration. I want to thank the administration for pulling together that deck, which obviously came in response to my information request and was turned around on pretty short notice. So I very much appreciate that. And I'm going to hold my questions to let other councillors go first. So I will go first of all to President Ed Flynn, and then it will be Councillor Michael Flaherty, and then Councillor Julia Mejia. And I'll read the order bits at a time, but just so everyone knows, it's Flynn, Flaherty, Mejia, Louis-Jen, Lara, Baker, Worrell, Fernandez Anderson, and then we've just been joined as well by Councillor Aaron Murphy at large. President, and because we again have some new folks, in general, we try to keep questions to kind of like 5 minutes at a time. So, you know, you ask your first couple of questions, get responses from the administration. If you've got a second round of questions, that's perfectly fine, but you save them for the second round so that we don't have a situation where one councillor is going back and forth for 20 minutes while everybody else is waiting. So that's our ask for people, is to kind of respect a sort of round system. And if you maybe perhaps lost track of time and have been going on for quite a while, you may see me raise my gavel in the screen. That's just a sort of visual cue, since we're not in the chamber together, to flag that it would be a good time to wrap up the question. So President Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Bark, and thank you to the administration team that is here today. Thank you to the administration team for the great work that you've been doing during this pandemic as well. I have one quick question, and I'm glad, Chief, that you mentioned it, Natalia, as well. As it relates to the City Council, I know I've gone on different walks with the mayor at various business areas. So I have a large district that includes a lot of women-owned businesses, a lot of businesses owned by communities of color, and immigrants as well. Tell me how specifically you're going to engage district councilors, how you're going to engage at-large councilors in this outreach and working with your team to make sure businesses in our city get the right information at the right time, including in the right language. How are we going to do that?
So, one of the first ways is not only through this hearing, but sending you all the information we have about these grants once available. In addition to that, as Natalia mentioned, there's the walks that we're doing, because one of the things we know is that not all of our businesses are connected virtually. Not everyone has a laptop, not everyone has access to the internet. And so the walks are meant to not only embrace our Boston roots and the cold, and get more acquainted with that, but really to meet our businesses face-to-face and provide support if necessary right there on the spot. I'm sure there are other ways, and we are absolutely open to any other thoughts or ideas from the council. But for me, it's very important that we're going directly to businesses, because even in previous iterations of the fund, there were some who, again, just there was an older barbershop owner who, I remember having to go visit to help apply for this because he had a laptop but didn't know how to use the internet. So things like that. So those are some ways that we plan on engaging the council, but look forward to other thoughts or ideas that you may have.
Thank you, Chief. I have no. Natalia, were you going to?
Yes, I was just going to add one more piece. So we've also done a lot of one-on-one support for businesses. So if you all encounter any business that needs specific support, my team has helped people with limited technology access, limited language access, and we'll actually sit with that business owner and go through the application and fill it out with them. So that is another option. So I know that we're all busy, but please don't ever hesitate to send a business our way. And you can do that very simply at smallbiz@boston.gov. And that comes directly into my inbox with my team. And we will do direct outreach to those businesses to make sure that they know how to apply and what the steps are to apply.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Natalia. Council Buck, I have no further questions. Looking forward to the Q&A with my colleagues as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, President Flynn. Before I go to the next speaker, I just want to say two things. One is just if you are watching this and you want to testify in this hearing, I think we may be having some trouble with the committee email. So I'm going to ask folks to email our committee staff directly. So that's Michelle, MICHELLE .a.goldberg, GOLDBERG @boston.gov. So michelle.a.goldberg @boston.gov. And if you need the Zoom link so you can come and testify, please do. And we also accept testimony during and after the hearing that's sent in by email as well, and that'll be circulated to all councillors. So I just want to make sure folks know that. Now going to my vice chair on this committee, Councillor Michael Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the chief and the administration, and I'd be remiss if I do not start by just thanking Natalia for her great work. She's been on this since day one, since the very beginning of the pandemic. Can't tell you the number of calls and/or Zooms that we have been on with small local businesses, and she has been a wealth of information and has been very helpful. And hopefully you had an opportunity to take a little bit of a break in the action before things picked up again. But I just want to say thank you on behalf of all the folks that I represent across the city, particularly the businesses that did reach out to me and my staff. And you've been a pleasure to work with, and we're fortunate as a city to have such a dedicated professional in your spot. So I just want to pass those kind words along and say thank you. Shifting gears to questions, beyond prioritizing the 3 business types that were outlined in the presentation, are we looking at certain industries, for example, and I think about South Boston Waterfront, the Ray Flynn Marine Industrial Park, Wyatt Circle, the meat packing and fruit produce areas, good blue collar jobs, the seafood processing, the fish cutting, the meat packing. They've been hit extremely hard. I noticed that they accounted for about 15% of the total applications, but were awarded less than 1%. So I want to get a sense as to what, if anything, are we doing for those certain industries that basically are back of the house for a lot of the restaurants and shops and retails that we're talking about, and what can we do to sort of bring some relief to them? That's my first question. The second question is, I guess, how do we determine the appropriate grant size amount based on what we're seeing in those applications? And then lastly, obviously, and Council President Flynn touched on, how can we be helpful as council is to, I guess, to leverage our relationships with, those small businesses, the folks that I was putting in touch with Natalia early on in the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, but as well as our main streets and in our Chamber of Commerce's. So that's it for me. I just want to kind of identify, again, to recap, what are we doing for those industries? Thousands. I think about the Ray Flynn Marine Industrial Park. I want to say that there's 8,000 employees and growing that go down to the park, and predominantly they're in the seafood processing, cold storage, freight forwarding, ship repair. Again, good paying jobs, good blue collar paying jobs with benefits. But those industries, those companies took it right on the chin because they were being asked to supply less or to store less because the restaurants weren't ordering because they were closed. I just want to make sure that we're not losing sight of those very precious industries that call Boston their home, and they've been really mainstays. A lot of them are multi-generational companies that put, as I referenced, just the Ray Flynn Marine Industrial Park alone, that's 8,000 employees. Then you talk about over at the meatpacking district. Then you talk over at Wyatt. That's a ton of economic opportunity there. So, and then again, how do we determine the size of the grant was second question. The third one was, what can we do to be helpful?
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for those kind words. Really, really kind of you. So the first question, so I think when we first started doing the relief funding for small businesses, we kind of had to put some parameters around those business types. One, we worked really closely with the BPDA research team to identify those industries that are hardest hit, that were hardest hit and continue to be hardest hit. And then with the second parameter was really business size. So these were really geared towards small and local mom and pop type shops with no more than 25 employees, which in most industrial instances, they wouldn't qualify under the scope of this particular grant. However, over the course of the last 18 months, we have been trying to identify ways to support larger businesses, and particularly, in those industries that you named, but also in the entertainment industry and other really hard-hit industries that tend to be larger businesses, which oftentimes our funding has been very limited. And those businesses tend to need more funding. So I definitely welcome an opportunity to partner with you, Councillor, to think about ways to support those larger companies through really funding. We know many of those companies had easier access into some of the federal funds when they came out. And for us, it was really about targeting the folks in our neighborhoods. And so it hasn't been a huge priority on my side because I deal with the really small businesses, the 25 and fewer employees. But it is definitely something that we need to target and be able to support in different ways. And that might not be my shop necessarily, but there are opportunities for us to do that with the cabinet. The second, we determine the totals based on what people told us that they need. So we did ask for very explicit and descriptive budgets, including what the relief funding would be for and what the growth funding would be for. Now, obviously, almost every business requested the full 20,000, but maybe only supported parts of that in their budget request. And so we are going through budget by budget and looking at what folks are asking for. We put together some, structures for us to be able to help guide how much each business would be receiving. Obviously, we want to fund people at the maximum amount, but in order to serve more businesses, we're really looking at those requests very intentionally. So one business might get less than a different business, and that's not because those businesses are unequal, but rather the information that they provided to us is a little bit more specific or a little bit more clear. A lot of business owners were able to give us exact dollar amounts of the things that they needed to purchase, which makes it a little bit easier. And because they have to demonstrate to us exactly how those funds are used as they align to what they asked for, we needed to be really, really intentional about funding people based on what they said that they needed versus what they requested, if that makes sense. And then I'll turn it over to the chief. Obviously, I think on my end, I love partnering with all of you. I've partnered with every counselor here at some point. I'm super excited to partner with some of the new counselors. But we work with the main streets, we work with different commercial districts, and anywhere where you want to be involved and where your contacts could be really helpful for us to connect with. I encourage those connections from all of you. But I'll turn it over to the chief.
Right. I mean, on the issue of how do we work, more closely together, even if it's, continues to be virtually, but all of you have your own unique reaches across the city and across your districts. And so even if it's a one-on-one virtual conversation where folks tune in to get more information, things like that are showing up to local media that have a large reach in your community to get the information out there. End of the day, we know that it's not just something specific to our group that we're going to be able to get all the information out. We have to work in partnership. So again, all of the above to work with you, and then any other ideas you may have, we want to explore those.
Very good. Thank you, Chief and Natalia. And just a quick footnote is if you just keep a close eye, particularly on businesses that in our city that border communities that don't have the vax mandate. So it's easy to pop over to Quincy. It's easy to pop over to Somerville or to Chelsea or to Cambridge or to Dedham. And I think that we're going to start. We have already been hearing from businesses that neighbor those cities and towns that don't have the vax mandate for that reason. So I just want you to be cognizant. Clearly, we're looking at the communities and the industries that have been hardest hit. But I just want to raise and lift that up, that there are good small local businesses that are on the border, if you will, and folks that just don't want to deal with it are just going to go right across the street or into a neighboring community and spend their hard-earned tax dollars or their hard-earned money and savings in those businesses. And I want to make sure we try to prevent that or at least support those businesses. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Next up is Councillor Mejia, then it will be Councillor Alujan, and then it will be Councillor Lara. Councillor Mejia?
Yeah, thank you to everyone. Happy and congratulations, Councillor Bach, for sharing your first hearing in this committee, and to all of my colleagues. So just really quick, I'm gonna dive right into questions here. I see that you've bolded certain types of businesses for priority funding, given the impact the vaccine mandate has had on them. But I'm curious to learn, while childcare providers are not on that list, especially given how hard the pandemic has been for childcare providers across Boston. I'm also curious, when you say that duplicate applications will not be considered, does that mean that businesses are not able to receive grants for both the relief grant and the growth grant? How are we communicating that to applicants? Because I reviewed on the website, it did say that people can apply for both. So if you could just provide some clarity around what that communication looks like. And will the funding be first come, first served? Or are we going to award grants based on their applications? If so, how are we measuring business qualifications to receiving the fund? And how are we ensuring that this funding is going to small businesses and communities that have been the hardest hit by the pandemic? I know you had just mentioned some data collection, but I'm just thinking about particularly Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, and East Boston, kind of what the rollout is for community engagement and outreach to these neighborhoods. That's all for now.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. So just quickly, and let me know if I miss any of your questions. The first around childcare. So childcare has been a top priority for our office. And actually pre-pandemic, we started focusing more on helping those business owners actually see themselves as business owners. A lot of them just saw themselves as service providers. So we've done a lot of really intentional work with the Office of Women's Advancement to ensure that childcare businesses are seeing themselves as businesses and have been coming through our pipeline to get all of these funds. And we've put a very specific targeted outreach to those childcare businesses. As far as I can remember, there have been no childcare businesses that have not yet been funded. They are part of that priority group with the initial funding. So they are receiving those funds. The second piece of your question, it is one grant, but there are two components. So businesses can apply for both the relief and the growth, or just one or the other. And we've had all of the scenarios where somebody just needs help, getting up to date with their rent, but they don't want to grow their business, and so they'll only apply for the relief funding. What I mean by duplicate applications is that if you, as a business owner, one location, we don't want you to reapply for the application if you haven't been funded, because we still have your application on file. We have not done any first come, first serve since the beginning of the pandemic, because we want to have an equitable lens on how these funds are distributed. We have focused on neighborhoods. We've focused on, obviously we have larger commercial districts across the city. So, a space like Back Bay or, the South End, where there's a larger cluster of businesses. We want to make sure that we're doing our best to be proportional to the city's demographics and the city's business community, but we are being really intentional about making sure that businesses have complete applications, that they're applying for the correct scope of services that they need. And so we're doing a lot of one-on-one work, which is why we're not doing first come, first serve, but why we are working through by industry type, working through by business needs, etc.
Thank you for that. And I'm just curious, will people be provided feedback as to why, if they don't receive their funds, why, and then what kind of technical assistance are we providing to folks so that when they blow up our phone, I didn't get it. So I want to know some really good language that you all want me to share with folks. And then more importantly, I have a growth mindset, and I do believe that when people know what they could be doing differently, they usually act accordingly. So I'm just curious about what that technical assistance looks like for folks who are still in need, but weren't able to secure funding.
Yeah, so most of the people who have not secured funding is because they're not in the priority industry types, which we basically have put those applications on hold. We have communicated with all of those business owners saying, at this time, we can't fund them, but if we get additional funding, we may revisit their application. That's not going to happen for a lot of the professional services industries. It's not going to happen for a lot of businesses that contractors that maybe don't actually have small businesses, that they instead are 1099 contractors. We're trying to fund as many businesses as possible within kind of the space of what we can. So our kind of go-to language is really around, we're trying to fund as many businesses as possible, but the money that we have doesn't really allow us to do that. So we do have to prioritize businesses. There haven't really been a lot of businesses that we haven't funded because their application isn't complete or whatever. We're working with those businesses to make sure that their applications get complete and that they are correct. Some businesses that have been rejected have been not based in Boston. They have been too large or haven't provided us any documentation after continuous follow-up. So we are really trying to make sure that every business within these priority industries is funded, even if it takes us longer to do that. So I'm happy to share some of the language we've used. And I know that you all get a flood of questions. And as I have said time and time again, when you get that flood of questions, feel free to loop me in directly. And I am happy to make sure that they get the information that they need. We do not have capacity to go back and forth with every single constituent. We're trying to answer as many questions as possible, but my team is very small and we are very limited. And so we are trying to give as much bulk information as we can, emailing people in bulk ways so that it can actually relieve a little bit more time for us to review applications.
You might be small, but you guys are a mighty team. So, just make sure
you, Councillor.
Make sure you claim that power, because what you guys were able to do throughout COVID was just amazing. So I just want you to know that. And I
really appreciate that.
So let's just keep moving the needle. And, our office is always looking to find ways to partner and support. So once the communication roll out, because I've already sent folks the heads up that it's coming. And the first thing they say, well, it says September. I'm like, yeah, I'm just letting you know it's about to come out. So just keep looking. So can you give us a date and when you anticipate that the applications will be ready to roll out?
So the application is never closed. It's still open. We're still accepting applicants. The applications are still going on. What we've been telling all applicants is that we cannot fund anyone until these additional funds are approved. Hopefully we'll get a yes vote from all of you tomorrow so that we can start processing those. But the application itself has never closed. We were just waiting until the council was able to take a vote before we could continue issuing grants.
So I understand that and I appreciate that, but I do think that in terms of communication, there was a misconception when folks went to the website, and as I did too, it had the September 2020 someday. I see the gavel. But I just make sure that if there is a way for you all to clean up that language so that people know that they can start applying now, because folks, this was a week and a half ago that I sent this out and people thought that they had to wait because I said the applications are not, they need to update it. So I just think that just if we can fix that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll make sure that the language is clear. I think that language is just that's when the fund launched, but we never closed it and we never put a closing date on it. But I will make sure that that's more clear. Thanks, Council.
And Chair, if you're all right, I just wanted to answer the councilor's question on the technical assistance question. So, Councilor, one thing that you have said repeatedly is how in Boston, we are resource rich, but coordination poor. And taking that into account, this is the partnership discussed at the beginning with groups like Small Business Strong and the Coalition for an Equitable Economy, where on the application or the updated application, and for those who applied, we'll send something out to let them opt in, to sharing information with these groups so that whether or not they get an award from Boston or the state, that they are being connected with a technical assistance technical assistance providers specific to their industry, so that they are getting deep, long-lasting technical support, not just a one-off, you go to a workshop for 6 hours and now you're done, but rather a one-on-one engagement, and then potentially working with others in the industry to get more advice. So we're definitely focused on making sure this is a long-term effort.
Thank you. Thank you for the indulgence, Councillor Bach, and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all the good questions, Councillor Mejia. Chief, I don't think you can steal Councillor Mejia's lines, though. But that seems like it shouldn't be allowed. All right, let's see. Next up is Councillor Louis Jen, and then it'll be Councillor Lara, and then Councillor Baker. I did just want to make one comment as the chair related to what Councillor Mejia was asking about. I think that there's obviously a balancing act. This is a new council, and the council's been clear throughout the process with the American Rescue Plan funds that it wants to make a lot of space for public comment about how we should spend these funds, about kind of like a macro bird's eye view on these funds. And then there's the sort of vagaries of the fact that our committees didn't get appointed till last week. And so there's been some kind of logistical delay on that. And so the Wu administration, as I think everybody here knows, it proposed $8 million for the public transit transportation pilot that was moved by the prior council in December, and then also proposed this $5 million for the small business fund. And in each of those cases, there was sort of a case for, here's why make an exception and do like one small piece of this. In the case of the $8 million, it was in order to extend the pilot so there wouldn't be an interruption in free service of the 28 bus, and then to sort of build the branches out. And obviously we had hoped that would have started by now. It's very much being worked on, but that was the sort of justification under which the council passed that $8 million. And then this 5, I think as Natalia and the chief have discussed today, there's a huge set of backlogged applications that are sitting there already. And so the sense of sort of timeliness and the Omicron wave and the vax mandate, all of that sort of contributed, I think, to the case. But I just want those who are watching at home to know that, I'm now the chair of this committee. I've just been doing it for 5 days, but I definitely intend for us to have that bigger picture conversation. And I've communicated that to the administration. There's a hearing order that we filed last week for a hearing that I intend to hold on kind of the bigger picture update of where are we, how many of these funds have we spent, what are the accountability metrics, and how are we thinking about spending them overall. And I know it's important to President Flynn that the council have an active voice in that, and that we have real public engagement and testimony on that. So I just wanted to flag for folks who are watching this and saying, wait, why are we only talking about the 5 million? Shouldn't we be talking about the whole thing? That's very much a coming attraction. We will be talking about the whole thing soon. And we're not going to just keep doing smaller appropriations. But I do think that when this one was proposed a few weeks back, there were a bunch of good reasons why time was of the essence, and we shouldn't keep these small business owners kind of waiting on it. So I just want people to understand why we're having a dedicated hearing on this appropriation order and not today talking about the whole pot. Now, sorry for that. Councillor Louis Jen, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair. I want to give a thank you to Chief Adowu and to Director Erdabe. You guys have already been so helpful in this first month of mine. And so I never had a question about small business. So I look forward to working with all of you. I have 4 questions. I think some of them are pretty short. Once upon approval, how long will it take to actually disperse the $5 million? Because we see that there's an outstanding need of there's $5 million to date. There's $40 million of applications in. I'm sure you're going to get more. So just on that disbursement question, at what point will you be able to tell businesses, okay, all the money's out? And it's also just a question to about efficiency. How efficient are we in sort of getting that money out the door? Should I just say all the questions or, okay. Second question is there overlap? And I think the answer here is going to be no, but it's more of a data question. The businesses that self-identify as being Black or Hispanic, Latinx, MWBEs, are there, are we able to do an overlap between the ones how they self-identify in terms of their ownership and those that have that MWBE certification? I'd be curious to see that data if we are able to see that. And then third is the idea of meeting folks where they are. All of the ideas sounded really great. You know, I'll say this for myself, I'm down to help with the outreach to businesses, but I'm thinking about ways that we systematize outreach, and how do we make sure that no one is getting lost here? None of our businesses that can't use a computer, right? Like, it's good when you know someone went off, but how are we using ONS and our main streets to make sure that, like, hey, FYI, we have these funds that are available. If you need anyone, like, here's a card, and making sure that that's done in a way to address language barriers, to address technical barriers, so that we don't leave any stone unturned. I know that may require a lot of bandwidth and manpower, but I think using ONS and our main streets is a way that, and going door to door physically, is a way to make sure that, like, all businesses are aware of the money that's available. And I think that there's energy, there should be energy there to make that happen. And then fourth is that, will any of the other small business relief programs that existed continue on? Will we, that, whether it's a restaurant revitalization, the commercial rent program, any of these relief programs, will we see them 2.0 versions of those as well?
Thank you so much, Councillor. Okay. I'm going to try to get all the questions answered. How long does it take to get the money out the door? I think we will be able to get this money out really quickly because there are so many people in the pipeline. Typically, just for context for all of you, once an application is approved, we then will send them a contract, which is basically just a grant agreement. Once we receive a signed grant agreement, that's when we submit for payment. And that takes usually about a week to a week and a half to submit payments. We only issue payments on Fridays for the following Friday. So it could be as fast as 2 weeks if they get that contract back to us quickly. But once we issue that grant agreement, that money is kind of held until we get that contract back. We'll do outreach and make sure that that money comes back. My sense is we'll probably be done issuing money early March at the latest, because $5 million, while it is a huge infusion, is not enough money. And we will probably get, we'll probably be able to issue that out pretty quickly. Your question about the overlap between MWBEs and self-certified businesses, most of the businesses that are applying for small business relief funding do not tend to be certified. There are some, obviously, so that percentage is really small. Because certification is really focused on procurement, these businesses are usually not offering procurement type services and therefore do not get certified. However, we are trying to get more data on that, and we are working very closely with the supplier diversity team and the folks who do certification to get more businesses through that pipeline, because I think once businesses are certified, we're able to really open doors for them, and they're able to open doors for themselves in really profound ways. So I don't have data on that, but I can try and see how many of them are certified. But really, these are kind of different tech and data sets and data portals. And so we oftentimes don't, we'll even when we put certified business on the application for demographics, a lot of non-certified businesses will check that box. So it's not super clean data because it just doesn't exist that way, unfortunately. Touching on the outreach piece, I want to note that my team does canvass. We canvass regularly, about 2 to 3 times a year. Pre-pandemic, we've been doing that as a way of meeting and greeting business owners, particularly in those areas that don't have main streets, just to make sure that no one is falling through the cracks. We work really closely with Main Streets. We share information with them. We ask Main Streets to help us distribute that information. So while they may not be like business walks that are very highly visible, my team is spending significant amount of time in all of the districts on a regular basis, just engaging with their business owners in addition to kind of these very targeted canvassing opportunities. So I think a lot of the reason why, we'll drop off our card and, some literature, a lot of that doesn't always get to the business owner. The business owner Councillor's not always there. So we'll continue to do that. But I again, would love for any one of you to join us on those walks or canvases at any point in time, because I do think the visibility that you bring to the table allows us to get more people engaged with our office. And then finally, your question about all of the other funds and whether or not we'll replenish them. I would love that. So I will, we have run out of money in all of those funds. And so every time that let me give just a tiny bit of background and context. Every fund that we have put out has been directly tied to what we hear from small businesses and their immediate needs. And this last kind of round of surveys that we did with small businesses, it really indicated that they wanted some more flexible funding for other things that were not just relief, which is why we did this growth piece. Rent continues to be an issue. So, there are opportunities for us to think about 2.0s or 3.0s of all these funds. But I do think we have to be really responsive to the intended use of these funds, which is COVID recovery and relief. And so I think that has been the way that we've been focusing all of these funds. But I encourage the council to let us know if there's additional funds that we could potentially use, because I know that the small businesses in Boston would really appreciate more funding opportunities. So I don't have an answer, but I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. And yeah, count me in on those walks because I am more than happy to participate. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Lujan. Next up, Councillor Lara, then it'll be Councillor Baker and then Councillor Worrell. Councillor Lara.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you so much for all the information that y'all have brought today. I think that my colleagues have asked all of the questions that I had written down for you and your presentation, of course. One of the concerns that I did similar small business walks when I was on the campaign trail. And one of the concerns that came up often was that the smaller businesses where English was not their first language said that they hadn't received any relief, right? And so we're seeing kind of like accessibility, there's an issue with accessibility and language access. And so my hope is to just continue working with your office and Councillor Mejia to just increase accessibility for folks. I think we have a lot of small businesses, particularly restaurants, that are prioritized here in JP, and there's a stark difference between the restaurants in JP who have received aid and the ones who haven't. And so I think that is more of a commitment and a hope than a question. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lara. It's nice to meet you. Just so you know, we do offer all of the applications since the very beginning in 11 languages, which does not mean that there is accessibility there. I totally get it. I also want to just note that in my office in particular, we have Spanish speakers, Vietnamese speakers, French, Haitian Creole. And so if there are ever businesses that you come into contact with that do need that direct support right away, please send them our way. We'd love to connect with them to make sure that they know how to apply for these funds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. I think the issue was less about not knowing that it was available to them, like not actually hearing anything about I know that the city does a really great job at translating, but when we make announcements, it's kind of like one tone in terms of we're doing it virtually, it's on the TV and so I think that the direct outreach that you're doing is really impactful, and I'm sure that you need support from the district offices to make sure that you get to everyone. So I am offering that.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll look forward to working with your office and all those represented to kind of pinpoint where we're finding those issues, so we bring the appropriate folks along to translate.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor. Councillor Baker, and then it'll be Councillor Worrell and Councillor Fernandez-Anderson. Councillor Baker. Councillor Baker, you're on mute. Okay. I think try one more time, Councillor Baker. All right, I'm just gonna text him and see if he's having technical difficulties. We'll go to Councillor Worrell and then I'll go back to him if I can get Councillor Baker. Councillor Worrell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this hearing, and thank you, Chief and Natalia. I'm a small business guy, small business owner, so this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm looking forward to collaborating and working with you guys and bringing more relief to the small business sector. A few questions. Were there any common similarities in financials, whether it be like expenses or revenue, in the 628 businesses that were first approved for the grant? Just want to see if there's anything that we can learn based on revenue or expenses. And then has there been any follow-up with the 628 businesses that have been approved to see how they're faring during this time as well? Just wanted to see how impactful, I know we're still going through COVID, but how impactful was that first 600, that first set of grants for those businesses? And then in terms of outreach, is it possible for the city to mail letters regarding the grants that are out there and technical assistance to these small businesses, or even social media marketing? And how do we plan on getting to the businesses that are not on the main streets? Those are my, and then my last question is, I've had a few people reach out to me. They wanted to find out how to become a technical assistance provider to the small businesses. So how does one go about becoming one of those technical assistance providers?
Awesome. Thank you, Councillor. Very quickly, yes, we've seen lots of trends in what folks have been requesting. I would say the majority of businesses are still requiring rent relief for their commercial space. But alternatively, we've also seen some really great consistency around investment in the growth of their business through marketing and technology, which is, I think, really great. We saw a lot of businesses have to pivot during the pandemic. We went from no technology whatsoever to learning technology. We have some great partners across the city that have worked with us on some of this stuff around technology and making sure that we're closing the digital divide specifically for small businesses. To your follow-up question, how impactful have these funds been? While we have not had the capacity to reach out to every business that has received funding, we have heard anecdotally from most of these businesses how thankful they are and how helpful this money has been to keeping them in their commercial space, or keeping their doors open, or keeping their employees, with jobs. So we will continue to do outreach. All of those folks are added to our newsletter. So any new resource that we put out there, including our regular programming, which is a technical assistance, the Restore and Design program, et cetera, those continue to be kind of a pipeline into those programs. So we let folks know about all the different services that we provide so that they know how to reach us. I love the idea of a mailing to all the businesses. Mailings are really expensive, and I will definitely take this back and see if, and obviously I'll ask the chief in just a minute to touch on that, but mailings are an option. I do want to note that we do not have, while we have kind of the addresses of all the commercial storefronts, that does not necessarily mean that they're going to the business owners directly. Sometimes that goes to the landlords. So that is a great option. But again, those canvases where we go around and chat with individuals is a really great tool for us. And then finally, our technical assistance program is always taking new providers. We created a rolling basis, which is the first time ever in the procurement process to do that. We did that just before the beginning of the pandemic, which actually was perfect timing, where every first of the month, the applications are due to be considered. They're available in the procurement portal at boston.gov/procurement. We encourage technical assistance providers to submit applications because it does help us further support businesses in all the different elements that they might need, from accounting to marketing to legal to co-ops to, you name it, we have providers there. So happy to send you more information on that as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Councillor Worrell, are you all set?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll go back to Councillor Baker at the end. I'm going now to Councillor Fernandez-Anderson, and then it'll be Councillor Murphy, and then we were joined some time ago by Councillor Ricardo Arroyo from District 5, so he's also here. I'll be third. Councillor Fernandez-Anderson, you have the floor.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I appreciate this is my first time talking or commenting or questioning. So for the record, it's not my maiden speech, right? Okay. All right. So, hola, Natalia. Dr. Edua, somebody just said he's not a doctor. Why do you keep saying that? I was like, he's my doctor. That's it. That's what I'm
I'll take it.
Thank you.
We all get promotions on this call sometimes.
Oh, work. So I have about just 2 questions and maybe a comment. Really appreciated the wraparound technical assistant idea. Would love to meet with you very soon. I have something that I'm working on to file. It's going to take all of my peers to support, and I think it's innovative. I think it's really great if we could, it would be really great if we all, Natalia, Chief, if we can all get together and collaborate on this effort. And so I think that's super crucial, right? Because, I have experience in this, and I know that Main Streets is not like, they need so much more support in that, and the manpower is definitely needed. Now, my question first is, what are some of the driving factors for approval? And the second question to that is, are those factors legally binding or just city policy? And I'll stop there, and then I'll give you the second part of my question.
So the requirements for approval are complete applications, which indicate that a business is in fact operating in Boston, does have an address in Boston, and is a legitimate business. So as long as they submit all of that information and we can verify that, that's the extent of the requirements. I don't believe any of them are legally binding except for the grant agreement, which they signed, which is a legal contract that says that they will use the funding that they received in the way that they intended. So, for example, if you tell us you're going to spend $10,000 on rent, and then you spend $10,000 in a different way, that is a legally binding contract. But as far as I'm concerned, I think that is the only piece that's legally binding, and I'm just hopeful that I understood your question correctly.
So for example, a business applies and they owe some tax or they owe some money in the city, and one of the policies are they're not going to qualify. Correct. Is that just city policy because that could be overlooked, or is that legally binding? Is that a law like that we cannot break?
Got it. So a condition of the application is that they are in good standing with the city, which means that they don't owe the city money, although they can get in good standing and then receive those funds. And I believe that there's two kind of pieces there. One, it is policy, but the second piece is that the ARPA funds are restricted to business development. So for example, we can't use federal funds for them to then pay the city back with they owe the city. And so a business that's not in good standing, that hasn't paid their taxes, the policy said is, we have to be really careful that we're not giving people money if they're not paying their part in the tax piece. But the other piece is the legal constraints of the actual dollars at hand.
So that I understand that we cannot use money in order for them to be in good standing, right? For them to pay back in order
Correct.
To be in good standing. What I'm trying to figure out is the policy itself that restricts us from qualifying them. The policy itself, our policy in the city, we cannot help them if they're not in good standing. They don't qualify, right?
Correct.
Like for this, we can't use that money, federal money, to do it. But what I'm saying is, I come in, I owe some money, right? I'm a Black business owner. I'm already struggling. I don't qualify. That policy itself, is that just city policy?
I believe that is just not just, but it is city policy, and I can't speak to it. We'd have to talk to the ANF team. This is something that the threshold of what puts somebody in good standing is not very high. And there have been a lot of instances where businesses owe tens of thousands of dollars to the city of Boston, which makes it really, really a challenging issue. I do want to say that we have been trying to work with businesses during the pandemic, especially those that do owe the city lots of money that have not been in good standing. But yes, it's a city policy.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think, in terms of, I heard Councillor Worrell touch on this, in terms of, how impactful and looking at just metrics or whatever rubrics you're using to measure whether or not after supporting a business with a small grant or whether or not it's impactful. I'm interested in a monitoring system, some sort of way that we can actually measure how impactful that is. And I think Councilor Worrell was talking about this, and I'm really interested in looking at exactly how are we measuring whether or not, if that, and I think, Chief, you mentioned this, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean $10,000, $15,000 or even $50,000 that afterwards, right? We know that the technical assistance is needed. But beyond that, it has to be sort of like a continuity of investment, right? More than technical support of how you're investing your money, right? And how are you looking at marketing and all these technical assistance that's going to allow the business to flourish. And so how are we measuring in terms of when we get them to 15,000 and that gets them out of that temporary barrier? And then what's the next step, right? So that, I think that metric is going to take us to the next level so that we can have the backup to this 5 million thing. And so with that, and I welcome your feedback, please. With that, I wonder also in terms of equity. So y'all know what I'm about to say, right? The policy that works for a business in South Boston with an overprivileged small business owner is not the policy that works with a small business owner in Nubian Square, right? So what or how are we approaching this? And I understand prioritizing based on the need or, in terms of who suffered the most. But in terms of equity, like this equal type of blanket policy does not help the Black business owner that is already underprivileged and already struggling, right? And already far behind. So when we apply these monies, and $5,000 ain't nothing, we know that, we all agree. But when we apply these policies, then how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to ensure that we apply this money across the board equitably, but not equally? Because if I am underprivileged, I believe equity means that I should apply according to the need, according to what's going to bring me to my competitor, to my counterpart. Those are kind of like what I'm thinking about. I don't need answers right now, but I would love to collaborate and begin to talk about those things. But please, your feedback.
Well, yes, and I want to respond only because you're absolutely right in everything that you're sharing, and it's why a lot of what you've raised is a piece of the priority for our cabinet moving forward. For this last question about monitoring. It's a good question and a great idea, and partly why we're expanding this beyond just a grant program to also providing that technical assistance with these partners who will be helping in shaping what that monitoring looks like. So ensuring that we're not just handing the check and people just use it in whatever capacity, but rather working with these TA providers through this system to appropriately apply the money that they're receiving. But it's a good question. And as we're building out what this program looks like, definitely we'll make sure that the monitoring piece is a huge piece of that. To the other points that you raised, again, absolutely correct, which is why, in my opening remarks, this is one of the first things that we need to do. It is not the only thing. The grant itself is not going to save many of our businesses. And that's why this has to be part of a larger effort of a series of policies that are, obviously through the equity lens, that are focused on helping our communities thrive. So beyond this grant, beyond the TA, it's why we need to be focused on things like commercial acquisition. It needs to be why we're focused on things like incubator programs that connect folks to these vacancies, rebate programs that help folks with rent, et cetera. So it's not just the grants which you're pointing out, and we look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you so much. My last comment, I guess, is just about refreshing, Chief. I'm still going to call you doctor. My last comment, I guess, is about the policy, the city policy. It's stupid. We should get rid of it. We can't, like, if I owe the city money, I need money. Okay, let's get rid of it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. We'll take that back to A&F and legal to figure that part out. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson. Next up is Councilor Murphy, then Councilor Arroyo, and then Councilor Baker. Councilor Murphy.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Chief and Chair and Natalia for this. It's been very informative, and my colleagues for your questions. So throughout the campaign and the first few months in office here, I continue to intentionally visit small businesses in every neighborhood. So it's great to hear that you're doing what I already hear, like even this morning, 2 small businesses asking for the support that your office is already providing. So I'm happy to know that if I reach out to you, I can connect them to services, if it's technology or just knowing where to find the grant. All of that is so important. So thank you for that. And also very hopeful and happy to hear how you're proactively reaching out to small businesses and supporting with, and trying to break down those barriers, if it's technology, if it's language, information, that the grant's even there, something I know is true across all departments in the city of Boston. I always say we're a rich city, but not all of our residents are connected to the resources. So making sure that supporting your office, because it's so important to small businesses. Many of my questions were asked and answered, but one thing I do want to know is there preference to Boston resident-owned businesses, that the owners actually live in Boston, not just own a business here in Boston? Do we give preference to those businesses or give them more money or something? Is there some difference when deciding?
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for your work as well. I will say that when we are reviewing the budgets and when we're reviewing the information on the applicants, we do ask and look for a business owner address. It is not a disqualifying factor if a business owner doesn't live in the city, nor do they get additional funds or anything like that. We do, for example, if there is a franchise in Boston and it's a small, local franchise owner, we do require them to be Boston residents in order to receive funding. So there are ways in which we are kind of further supporting somebody who wouldn't typically be like a mom and pop, but that they live in the city of Boston. But otherwise, we don't take residency into consideration, aside from making sure the
application. Is there data on that? I think it would be fascinating to find out, because as we know, in your department too, like, of course, the small business offers jobs and a resource in our neighborhoods, what's important, but the profits, if the profits, they're going to their, towns, they're going back to Milton, they're going to Needham, wherever. It would be great to know how many, because I think also it ties into supporting small business owners, opening stores, right? Supporting, residents to open stores in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, I will work with our tech team to see if we can pull some of that data and try to, that's a very interesting piece.
Awesome, thank you.
Of course.
Thanks so much, Councillor Murphy. Next up, Councillor Arroyo, and then it'll be Councillor Baker. Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to everybody for the questions that you've been asking. I just want to go into really quickly the disparities between applications and applicants and the approved. I know this was touched upon just a little bit earlier, or maybe a bit earlier. But if you notice, for every racial demographic, the approval rate goes higher than the application rate, except for Black African-American applicants. I know some of this deals with priority job categories or something like that was brought up earlier. But my question is, why is there such a racial disparity in the Black African-American applicants versus awarded specifically?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So there's a couple of factors that again, we turned this data around pretty quickly, so I haven't been able to do a full breakdown of the numbers, but we did see a lot of duplicate applications, a lot of incomplete applications. And I will also note that we received a lot, hundreds of 1099 Uber drivers and contracted staff that identify as Black owned. And those folks are not part of the priority categories. And so those folks are a huge percentage of the total, for example, Black applicants. And so when we look at the total numbers, you're going to see some of those disparities because of those kind of inherent application totals. I think because we're testing this new technology and trying to figure out all of the information that we haven't been able to really dissect it too much to actually see whether or not those numbers equate to an actual disparity. Because when you think about the actual approved totals, we are disproportionately funding, minority-owned, women-owned businesses as it relates to the total population or total number of businesses. So we have to do a lot more investigative work around our data to be able to say whether or not there's an actual disparity there. But I see. And that's why I called it out during the presentation. I know that those numbers can show and can be misleading in that sense. I want to indicate that those numbers are not, they're just raw data. So we have not been able to actually do that work yet.
So just two questions I'm going to piggyback off of this. And the first one is you brought up that this may not be an actual disparity due to the fact that it's a certain percentage of the population or certain population size of the businesses in percentages, it may not be a disparity, but doesn't the fact that the applications, unless of course the entirety of that difference is that it's double applications or multiple applications, and that's what's causing that disparity, doesn't this fact that so many Black and Latino businesses are applying for this show that there is some inequity or disparity in the ways in which people are being impacted primarily by this? If the small business relief funds, if they're applying at numbers way above the percentage of other businesses, but they're a minor portion or a much smaller percentage of the businesses in Boston, doesn't that in and of itself indicate that there is some racial disparity in the ways in which these businesses are being hit?
I don't have any data I can't with any real, I can give you my opinion, but I can't tell you whether or not that's an actual disparity. As I've mentioned many times on these hearings, when we look at the racial makeup of our business community in Boston, specifically our small businesses, our numbers are showing that we're doing very targeted outreach. And I think it would actually almost indicate that because we've done so much outreach and we've built so many relationships with businesses of color, I do believe that that's actually why we're getting more applications than the latter. So, I wish I had some data that I could showcase and back that up, but I don't want to share my own personal opinion on this call.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, do you have, Chief, do you want to?
Well, I would just say, I appreciate your raising that point, and just to note that, because of the backlog that we have, one of our priorities is making sure that those numbers change when we give you the final report. And so making sure that, I think some of those numbers are based on, as Natalia mentioned at the beginning, some of the incomplete applications that our folks are working to help them complete. But again, one of the focuses is making sure that those numbers change in a positive way when we give you the final report.
And I appreciate both of your efforts to doing that. Two questions. One, I already had, another one sort of came off of one of the things you just answered. So the one that came off of what you answered, you said that we had Uber drivers and sort of Lyft drivers applying. We obviously know that there's sort of an initiative going on right now about Uber and Lyft and how that plays into it. And I'm not asking you to opine one way or on the other on that. What I am asking is, are those companies directing their drivers to apply for this, or is that something that actually feels like it's independently driven and sort of a coincidence that you're getting so many of those?
I think I don't know. I would be shocked if a multi-billion-dollar company like Uber and Lyft were, referring their applicants or their contracted staff to us. But I will say that during the beginning of the pandemic, when we launched the Reopen Boston Fund, we did include drivers, taxi drivers, as well as Uber and Lyft drivers as a way of getting additional funds to help protect themselves from COVID-19 by getting barriers and face masks and PPE and all those things. And so I think a lot of those folks who received funding in the forms of small grants to get to procure PPE on their own. I think because they were connected to us already, a lot of them just assumed that they would be eligible for this fund as well. So I think part of that is probably linked, once again, to the outreach efforts that our office has done to engage different business types, especially during the times where we had spikes in cases, and we wanted to make sure that businesses could protect their staffs, could protect themselves by purchasing PPE. So I actually think the correlation is probably higher to the Reopen Boston Fund than to Uber and Lyft as large companies directing their contractors our way.
Okay, and the only reason I asked that is because that multi-billion-dollar industry has been directing their drivers to PPE and other federal programs, and it wouldn't be that shocking to me at all if they also included money, millions of dollars that they are aware of that has been widely publicized for small business funds to their drivers in efforts to not pay them themselves. And so that's not as surprising, or wouldn't be shocking to me if that's what happened. So I wanted to know if we had any information as to whether or not that was something we knew, whether or not anybody had put in how they had heard about it or how they were directed to it. And so specifically on the racial analysis of this, are we doing any, is there any plan for an equity analysis on this? This is now Small Business Relief Fund 2.0. Are we going to do an equity analysis at some point, or is that in the works already?
Councillor, do you mean similar to the disparity study where we bring in a consultant, or do you mean using our internal resources to analyze the data?
So, well, here's the deal. I'm not the expert on who's going to be doing the equity analysis, so that's something I would sort of leave to you all. But what I mean by that is, when we have a large percentage of folks who are either not applicable, doing incomplete apps, or doing double apps, or things like that, are we not sure that there's not an equity analysis to why that's happening across racial lines and across different cultural or language lines? Are we doing any kind of analysis to figure out whether or not the system or the way in which we engage that system is leading to those issues? Because if you're telling me that we have a 13% gap between Black and African American people applying and then receiving or approved processes, and that most of that could very well just be that they're doing the applications wrong, and then every other group is growing between approval and applications, that would suggest to me that perhaps there's an issue with the way in which we are doing this from an equity standpoint, and maybe that deserves an analysis.
Yeah, I can definitely look into that, and I'll turn it over to the chief.
Yeah, just to say, agreed with you, Councillor, and this is again partly why we have reached out to our partners at the beginning of the stage and at the end of it. A lot of it is that we know that there are issues and are seeking to redress them through these partnerships and helping folks in the application process and then after either being awarded or not being awarded. But to your point, we will conduct a more rigorous analysis, I would say. So there's something on paper to be able to share with the council.
Thank you. I just want to make sure there's nothing we're doing that's causing those issues in those sort of racial groups and communities. Thank you. That's it. I threw the gavel. Thank you for your indulgence, Chair Bach.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. Councillor Baker. You're muted, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for sticking with me. Also, your breakdown earlier, I appreciate. So we are going to get into the overall, what the opera money looks like, what the relief money looks like. I appreciate you're setting the record straight on that. So to just look at this a little bit on the graph that we have in our packet, the Small Business Relief Fund started in April 2020. Are we talking all federal money on this? You know, like it started with 6,724,000, or is that City of Boston commitment? Can you explain like where all these monies, and down the bottom of the column is 29 million. Is that all, is that, Natalia, I'm looking at you because it's probably you answering it. I want to frame it. So like, is it all been federal money, or how much of that has been a city commitment out of the 29 million?
Thank you, Councillor. So when we launched the fund in April 6th of 2020, the CARES Act funding had not yet come out. So that was a city commitment, which was later replenished by CARES Act. It was taken out of my team's HUD funding. So it was still federal dollars, but we repurposed our restore, design, and technical assistance dollars accordingly, with the permission, obviously, of HUD to be able to do so. So most of it has been federal funds that have come in.
Okay, thank you. And I should have, before I started my question, and Shagun, welcome. It's good to see you in your role back around. You came back around to the City Council, didn't you? Thank you for that. And in the Small Business Relief Fund 2.0, it has September 21, 8 million. That's not part of this 5 million here also, is it?
Correct. So it would be an additional 5 million to a total of 13 million.
Okay, thank you. Those are pretty much my questions. And Kenzie, again, I appreciate you talking about the money, where it's going to go, because we've already, it's been 8 million for the transportation, 5 million on this here. I believe towards the homeless sort of effort down at Mass and Cass is 5 million towards there. So the money is starting to go out the door. I'd like to, get a handle of it. What is left of that? What we saw is 400 million in opera, last year, or whenever it was. And my last point that I wanted to make is to piggyback on what Councilor Flaherty had said about the passports and forcing people into sort of city mandates. I think we need to free up the hands of business. I think we should be talking about the date when we can all take our masks off and we can move freely. I think it's there, and I think we should work with that business. And I don't want to hammer that too much, that if we're talking about helping business, that would be a way to do it. Thank you, Kenzie, and I appreciate you sitting at the head of this fund here. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks so much, Councillor Baker. And I'm going to move to some questions from me now. And then if councillors have a follow-up question, if you would raise your Zoom hand or text me so I know, because we do have public testimony. I want to get to that as soon as I can, but I will do a second round of questions if anybody's got them. So I guess one question, Natalia, and again, is just going back to the start. Chief, you talked a little bit about our effort to also point people towards the state. And I think I want folks watching at home to understand that there's federal dollars that were sent for COVID relief, both at the state level and at the city level. And so what Councillor Baker was just talking about was how we appropriate the city level funds. But it's also really important for us, as the city of Boston's got 10% of the people in the state of Massachusetts. And when you look at it with an equity analysis, we have a lot of really hard hit individuals and businesses. And so it's like pretty important that we as a city also make sure that our folks receive a proportionate, appropriate, equitable share of the state ARPA dollars. And so I'm glad to hear that you guys are kind of dovetailing with, trying to let our folks who are applying for our funds know, hey, there's also state funds, because frankly, at a scale level, the state just has, more than 10 times more than we do in this funding, and the business community is so in need. So I wonder if you could just speak a little bit about, from a kind of like early signs perspective, do we feel like Boston businesses are getting their proportionate share of the state level business relief? Have we seen people kind of, the folks who are applying to our fund, do we see them picking up on those state dollars? And I know that early on, Natalia, we saw a lot of people, because of the outreach you described, sorry, that's my own timer quote. So like coming to the city fund, but not necessarily applying for the state and federal funds. And we found that we were actually succeeding in being lower barrier, which was great, except that we're the ones with less money than anybody else. So I just wonder if you guys could speak a little bit to that, because I think we want to get dollars into our businesses' hands, whether they're ours or the state's, sort of technically.
That's a great question, and I would say proportionally, I don't know, I don't have the data, but I will say that from the very beginning of the pandemic, we were funneling people and referring people and piloting in that way. I do think that there's a correlation with relationships and connections to the people who are issuing these funds. And I will say that all of the counselors on this call who were around in early 2020 played a huge role in making sure that that advocacy was there. But I don't have the data to really be able to say either way. I do know that we have been in a lot of those conversations, if not all of them, with helping businesses get to PPP, get to MGCC, connecting with all the different fund pipelines. But a lot of those, a lot of the actual distribution of funds and how they're chosen, or what percentage those are given, we were not part of those conversations. So I don't have that data.
Chief, were you going to say, I guess do we have any way of anecdotally getting a sense of whether the businesses that we're referring are actually having success with the MGCC process? Or?
Well, so one of the reasons I'm excited about this particular partnership is that the money that Mass Growth Capital Corporation has is from the ARPA funds, as opposed to where they got it before, which they had restricted funds from HUD and other federal departments, which meant that, to your point about the barriers, is one reason why in my previous role, a lot of Black and brown businesses were not getting state money. And so for this one, though, it's pretty much similar, right? Both of our dollars would be coming from ARPA. The state is not placing a huge amount of restrictions on access. For the 50 million, they're prioritizing women and minority businesses. It's not just for women and minority businesses, but it is a priority, which we think will be great, because as we're connecting our folks to that fund as well. But so in the past, huge amount of barriers on the state level, but I think moving forward, there'll be less of those restrictions because it's coming from the ARPA dollars.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to hear. And I would just say anything any political advocacy that you guys need to make sure. I know that, for instance, that on the housing side, Chief Dillon's worked extensively with the state to make sure that it's not just that the Boston monies for rental relief are going to Boston renters, but that also, a share of the Massachusetts money for rental relief are going to Boston renters. So just similarly here, if you guys need political muscle, I'm sure the whole council joins me in wanting to see that happen. I think just a couple other comments. One would be, as you clean that data, vis-a-vis Councillor Arroyo's question, I do think at some point it would be helpful to understand, it seems to me that there's a distinction between applicant in the sense that someone literally pressed the button and kind of a qualified applicant, right? And it will tell us different things, are people being is that differential based on who met the basic eligibility requirements, or is that differential about kind of the more qualitative application judgment piece of the process? So just flagging that as you guys sort of come through that data and try to figure out what we're learning from it, that would be useful at some point for the council to have. And then, am I right in understanding that, I mean, just because we're putting in 5 million and the need is obviously enormous, we should expect that all of this 5 million will go into those 3 prioritized categories?
I haven't looked at the ask breakdown from businesses that have not been funded. Like, we haven't, again, done that breakdown. So I would say that the majority of the 5 million will likely go to these 3 industry types, but it is likely that we can still support some of the other high need businesses.
And you'll be going to folks who have not received any support from us prior to going to give more support to anybody who received.
Correct. As it pertains to this individual fund. So if somebody has received like the Reopen Boston Fund or the Commercial Rent Relief Fund, they can still get funding this time around. But if somebody has already received Small Business Relief Fund, they're kind of going to go to the back of the line.
And I know, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, we'll prioritize folks who have not been funded yet.
And I know that that you were, saying we don't want people submitting duplicate applications. That's part of how we get the data challenges. But what if somebody, who hears about this, they know they have an application in with you, but something about their situation has really changed since they put it in?
Yeah, for those folks, we do encourage them to reach out to us and let us know what some of those changes are so that we can do it on the back end. But we, because of the labor intensity that is required to go through every single application, for us to re-review your business certificate, your proof of address, and all of those things, it just does require a ton of work from our office, and we're trying to avoid that. So I'd rather folks, if they have updates to their application, they can always email smallbiz@boston.gov, and we'll make those updates on the back end, or reopen their application so that they can make them accordingly.
Got it. And can you refresh my memory? I should remember this, but the on the disparity study, I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking that it would be helpful to have, like, you're talking here in aggregate data about people from a whole bunch of different fields, but there's now a number of those fields where we actually have some sense from the disparity study of what the like racial ethnic breakdown of owners is in these different areas. But I know there's also a bunch of, am I right in thinking, so there's probably some overlap, but then there are a bunch of business areas that you're helping with this fund that, because they're not the type of businesses that the city procures services from, we wouldn't have done a disparity study, for instance, of like hair salons, because the city doesn't procure hair salon services. Like, am I right?
Correct. Yeah, okay. That's correct.
So I think just understanding to what degree are there categories, like subcategories, where we're like, oh, actually, we do have pretty good data on what this business field looks like demographically. And so there's a chance to do an apples to apples comparison of who's applying to us.
Yeah, we've been working with the research team as well as the city clerk's office on figuring out ways of capturing that data. It doesn't exist anywhere because my understanding is that anytime a business is registering to become a business, whether it's at the state or at the city level, there's never a place where we're asking people their race or how they identify. And therefore, we just don't have any of that aggregate data. So even with the research team, my understanding is they're still doing best guesses in all of this context. So even the numbers I have about how many what the percentages of Black owned or Latinx owned businesses, what those percentages are as it relates to just the business community and not the population size. It's a really hard number to really hone in on. So we are working on a couple of options to get better data. So it doesn't really answer your question, but we are looking at that, and I would refer back to the disparity study on those very specific industries. And you're absolutely right that there are many industries that we work with that would never engage directly with the city in that way.
Got it. Great. Well, I'll just say, just to reiterate again for folks, so I filed last week a docket, I think it's 194, with Councilors Braden and Worrell, that's kind of more about doing an overview of where are we on these federal funds the city has to appropriate, and kind of what's the accountability mechanisms for it, and how are we thinking, and how is the public thinking about how we should spend the remainder. So I do expect to hold that hearing in this committee sometime soon, but with enough notice for people who want to come and testify to be aware of it. I would just say, Natalia, to your earlier plug, that I think the more that your office can reflect back to the council, like, hey, okay, we spent the 5 million. Yes, we have all this unmet need. We all know that like the unmet need on the business side is sadly going to be larger than the city could meet, even if it threw all of its COVID recovery dollars at the business cause. And there's obviously a number of other competing needs, but you know, if there are targeted things like, oh, we're seeing that this sector in the city of businesses, like they're not eligible for the state and federal stuff, and they really need these things. I mean, I think that's part of what you guys are coming to us with now with this 5 million. But obviously, I think as we continue to talk about the whole picture, if there are targeted interventions like that, and also places like, again, like you're doing with this, where we can leverage the opportunity to have someone come to us and we're the entry point, but then we also point them towards bigger sources of funds, like at the state. I think we have to be smart about how we do this and how we like have the greatest impact, as some of my colleagues were saying before. But I want to go now. I'll just do, I'm going to quickly go to second round questions for anybody who has them. I see Councillor Flynn up on the screen, so I'll ask him if he has any, but in general, it would be great if people could either raise their hand. I see you, Councillor Mejia, or their Zoom hand, just so I know. So Councillor Flynn, did you have any follow-ups?
Council Buck, I have no follow-ups. Just want to say thank you to the administration staff for being here, for their important work that they're doing. Thank you.
Okay, great. Excellent. All right. Well, then I see Councillor Mejia's hand up. Councillor Mejia?
Yeah, thank you. I have a few follow-up questions. One is, I'm just curious, I know once upon a time we were doing engagement sessions with business owners to give them the heads up that things are coming down the pipeline. Just curious if those are going to be initiated. I'm just curious if there's any things in the works around focus groups to get feedback on how we, you know, the rollout and how we can streamline it and help support businesses. So if there's an opportunity for that type of feedback. And then I'm just curious how we're making this process more transparent. Is there like a public dashboard of sorts that details which businesses have been awarded and how much? And what is the tracking system, if any, to determine the impact that the funding has had on these businesses?
Thank you, Councillor. Focus groups are a great idea. And just to continue on your first, sorry, I skipped your first question, which was about workshops. We still host our small business conference calls every single Tuesday, where businesses can ask about both their status of their application, but also just any questions that they might have about this. We're always happy to host workshops and trainings for folks around different topics. And so if there's something in particular you'd like us to focus on, happy to host something accordingly. As I mentioned during the presentation, there will be a public dashboard for people to have access to the data. Yes, we're looking, and a couple other folks asked about the impact, which we will hopefully have some information on long-term impacts soon.
Is there a framework right now for the accountability dashboard of sorts so that we can take a look? I'm curious as to what information you're going to be sharing specifically around.
It's not an accountability dashboard. It is it's going to be a demographic and an overview of the grant funds as they've gone out. So we'll have an aggregate number of businesses as approved businesses, like what district or what neighborhoods they're in, racial breakdown, total number of businesses. In the past, we actually put the actual businesses that received funding, their names on boston.gov, and we're trying to figure out the best way to do that on this dashboard. Again, we are in the process of building it. There's been some issues with the technology, so we're working on that. I was hoping to have that ready to go today, but it's not yet ready. It's all tied to the applicants, so it is not aggregate data. It's not, research data. It is directly correlated with the applications.
And will you also know which the businesses that didn't get it, or you're just going to be highlighting the businesses that got the award?
We would likely only highlight the businesses that got the award just because of the number of duplicate applications. It would be, I think it would be unclean data.
Yeah, I'd be curious to get I guess, information about the ones that didn't, and then whatever follow-up is put in place to help support those businesses that still need some funding or additional support. So it would be great if we can have access, even if it's just an email to us, so that we have a better understanding of where we might be able to lean in a little bit to connect people to alternative opportunities. That's it. Thank you, Councillor Bach. I appreciate the second round.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Next up, going to Councillor Murphy, and then just if I don't see other councillors' hands, I will wrap us up and move to public testimony. We have 2 folks at least waiting to testify. But raise your hand if you want to get a last question. Councillor Murphy.
Okay, thank you. No question, just want to thank you. And I look forward to working closely with your office and my team, my staff. We care a lot about workforce development, small businesses, promoting neighborhoods, and just looking forward to the work with you. So thank you for this. It's been very informative.
Thank you, Councillor.
And thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Murphy. Yes, and thanks to all the councillors for coming today and for the thoughtful questions, and definitely to the chief and his team for an excellent presentation, and again for responding to so many of my questions in the information request so quickly and thoroughly, and appreciate you, Natalia, as a veteran of many of these council hearings. I was smiling a little bit to myself about the question about where all those different pots came from, because of course, I think we've had you up here to talk to the council about each of those pots individually and sort of how we're going to allocate them and how to think about it. And just really appreciate, I think we're all in this moment and have been now for 2 years trying to think about how you allocate things thoughtfully and equitably, also at the pace that an emergency demands, right? I think it's like that tension between, it would be, we want to be efficient, we want to get the money out the door, but then also we want to be fair and we want to help those who are most impacted. I think that's been a balancing act that your office just meets with a really good faith, hard effort every day. So grateful to you for that. And I certainly do expect as chair to be recommending passage of this docket tomorrow. I will say that I've said it a couple times, but I have expressed to the administration on numerous occasions that although I think that this is a great appropriation, this $5 million, and I also thought that the public transit $8 million was a great appropriation, that I don't think that now that the council is kind of seated and we've started the new term, that it makes sense for us to just do this all in these drips and drabs. And I know that the public also wants to weigh in on kind of how we think about these bigger picture tranches. And the last really big picture tranche we did was the $136.5 million that we did back in June 30th in connection with the budget in 3 different dockets. And so I think, we similarly need to be thinking about a larger scale going forward, but I do expect to recommend passage tomorrow. I'm going to go now. Sorry, Chief, actually, I'll give you a chance if you and your team want to say any closing words before I go to public testimony.
Just that I thank you all. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity and for your support. And we'll look forward to working with all of your offices on multiple approaches to supporting and growing our small businesses, not just this grant, but so many other programs and initiatives we can work on to keep our businesses where they are and to help them thrive. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thanks so much for joining us for your non-voll hearing today. And thanks also to Midori, who I know was with us earlier and has just been great as a partner with the council as well. All right, I'm going to go to public testimony now. If you are not already on the Zoom and you want to give public testimony, please email Michelle, michelle.a.goldberg@boston.gov to get the link. And I will go first to Senator Wilkerson, and then it'll be Jonathan, just so you know that you're next in the queue. Senator, you have the floor. Senator, you're muted.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the council. I'm going to speak quickly, so I'll stay in the time frame. First, I thank you for the hearing. I really appreciate it. You couldn't see me, so you wouldn't know I was smiling when you were talking about the plans going forward. We've been anxious about this since April when the committee created when the council created the COVID recovery committee. We were excited. We think that it is important. Because it's only through you that we believe that the city as a whole, the public, the community will have an opportunity to weigh in on some suggestions and ideas. And so on behalf of the Black Boston COVID-19 Coalition, for whom I'm testifying, I do want to say thank you, and I'm encouraged by what I heard. But a couple of things about the fund and where we are. Number one, I think that we have a restaurant on Dorchester Avenue, a 50 Kitchen was a perfect example of why you getting to that next step is so important. The restaurant opened 2 years ago amidst a lot of fanfare, really exciting. Their food is fabulous. They announced 2 weeks ago they're closing because they have incurred a level of debt during COVID that they don't see their way out of, and I get it. $5,000 wouldn't help them, $10,000 wouldn't help them, but $40,000 would. So this whole notion of being able to deal with the businesses in their need is important. So many of the councilors asked questions that I think are relevant to kind of that next step. Councilor Arroyo had questions about the disparity. And I think that there are clearly some answers to that. Love to have an opportunity to talk with the council about what is happening on the ground. The Black and Latino businesses were effectively shut out of the PPP and SBA loan process. Too much fanfare, it's public knowledge. And so the idea that they would be priority makes sense. But there are a lot of non-minority businesses that are struggling in this process. And we're now in our third year of COVID. And so if you think we had businesses that were struggling in that first year, there's nothing that has happened that would have stabilized any of the business that we're talking about. And so the conversation has to be different. And we're really looking to the council to do some things that are bold, that are transformative, which really gets to the process. I spent several months in 2020 and into 21 as a contractor for the city of Boston, assisting these very businesses we're talking about and trying to get through. At that point was just a $2,500 application. There were many who did not make it through, and I won't go into the details, but there's a reason why we are seeing what we see in that disparity. I would also say I don't share the chief's optimism that things have changed on the state level and they will now be a partner. Why? Because there is nothing on the state level like this that is happening. There's not anyone going door to door. There's not anyone targeting and talking. It is completely dependent on people finding them. And then the requirements are just like any other loan program, which defeats the whole purpose. And so I don't think the state's been a player, and I don't see, unless there's major changes, how they become a player. The reality is that there are three things, and BBCC has been consistent and insistent since we've heard of the announcement in April. The need, home ownership is our focus. Food insecurity is still very real. And then the business survival reality is going to require some real creative thinking, as I think Councilor Flaherty talked about this. What we're doing isn't enough. And we have an opportunity in the pool of money to do something different and bold. That opportunity lessens every day if we continue to piddle it away in smaller amounts, the 5 and 6 and 8 and 10 million, that we could really do something that speaks to recovery and always keep in our head in the forefront. That's what this is supposed to be about. COVID-19 recovery. And so just kind of substituting what we have for, the kind of different funds that may have been available anyway is not going to get us to that place. But there are clearly some ways to do it. And I really am excited and anxious to see this council step into that space to allow for the conversations to take place. If you have back taxes, I spent the first COVID Thanksgiving to Christmas, working with businesses trying to save their licenses, their liquor licenses. Former mayor put me directly in touch with the chief because outside of COVID, this is my work. This is what I do around the focus of Black and Latino businesses. And the reality is the city of Boston has over 1,500 liquor and alcohol licenses. Less than 20 of those licenses belong to Blacks and Latinos. That's a mark that of shame already. It would be more shameful at the end of this process, we have less than 20 because they couldn't pay their licenses or license fees, right? And believe me, on the ground, that's what's going on. So I'm going to stop there just to say we're ready. We are ready for a hearing. We're ready to present to you when given the opportunity, and really appreciate your comment and kind of letting people know kind of what's to come, because that's just been our question. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator. And yes, the whole reason that I introduced in partnership with colleagues the 0194 was so that the council would not be stuck having these conversations appropriation by appropriation, but could invite, you all and others into a sort of more global conversation about what's next. So I look forward to us having that. I think we want to have that in short order with, as I said, enough notice for people to know that it's coming. So whether that's next week or at the latest the week after, I think it's definitely a soon kind of thing, and look forward to being in further touch with you. Thank you for your comments. I'm going to go now to Jonathan. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Council, for letting me speak today, as well as Mr. Idowu and Mr. Tube for all the excellent work you've presented. Also, thank you, Senator Wilkerson, for all the incredible work you've been doing for helping Black and Latino businesses. I was really interested in learning all that you've done, and I'm definitely going to look up more as to what you've been doing. My name is Dr. Jonathan Van de Zand, and I wanted to start with a little bit of personal testimony. I was recently talking with a few out-of-state friends who cannot receive the vaccine due to medical contraindications. It was painful for me to tell them that the city I live in and love will not accept them due to biological circumstances beyond their control. If they do come, they'll be left out in the cold, unable to eat inside at restaurants, attend concerts, or go to the gym to stay healthy. Telling my friends that Boston will treat them as outcasts has been incredibly painful. As such, I started researching more into the effects of the mandates and was hoping that the council and administration could assure me that these mandates are worth the cost, both to individuals and particularly in this case, to our small businesses. In light of the facts that per the Boston Public Health Commission January 27 report, only 75% of eligible Bostonians are vaccinated, and that according to the CDC, vaccines sadly do not prevent the spread of COVID, merely reduce adverse effects. So greatly, I may add, and that many countries are now abandoning a lot of their mandates, calling them ineffective, most notably England and Denmark. I've got three related questions. Has the administration considered somehow allowing for medical exemptions to the vaccine mandates for those who, due to medical reasons, cannot receive the vaccine? Has the administration performed any sort of analysis of how the vaccine mandate has affected the revenue of our small businesses and their employee pool? And then finally, why do these mandates still exist if they're doing such great harm to our small businesses when a quarter of the population cannot work at some of these businesses nor provide them business? Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your testimony, and those questions have been entered on the record. I know that there's been further filings on this topic in council, so I know we'll be having further conversation. But I thank you for testifying and waiting for the whole hearing to do so. At this time, I think we've gone through everyone who's been signed up to testify. So I'll just double check. Michelle, Carrie, has anybody else reached out to us in the meantime?
No further signups, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Well, in that case, I'd just like to say that, as I mentioned before, I do intend to recommend tomorrow that the council vote to pass this docket for $5 million so that we can start getting these funds allocated. And I want to thank again my colleagues for joining us and the administration for joining us today, and everybody who testified. And with that, this hearing of the Boston City Council's COVID-19 Recovery Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.